Hello and welcome to the Spoon Podcast. This is your host, Michael Wolf, and today we'll be talking food and AI with Google's Evan Rapoport. I had met Evan when I was down at Google talking about the impact of AI on the food system, and he was in the audience, and we got to talk, and I thought, I really have to have this guy on the podcast. For the past decade or so, Evan has been looking at how technology could impact things like biodiversity and climate change. We talk about a lot of that, including a project he worked on that some of you may have heard of, a project called Tidal, which has been written about in the press a little bit, where he and Google look at how AI and computer vision could be applied to the world of aquaculture and to help those who run fish farms to do their job better by helping them have a better understanding of what's going on within the aquaculture environment. So we talk about that. We talk about the impact of AI more broadly on the food system and how Evan thinks newer technology like generative AI could have an impact sooner than we think in the world of food, including in areas like novel food development and ingredient development. So it was a really interesting conversation. I learned a lot. I think you will too. Before we get started, I do just want to make a mention that we will have an announcement here at the Spoon about something regarding the world of food and AI. We are going to drop the announcement in the next week or so. So if you are interested in that, just stay tuned. You know where to find us on the web. So, all right, that's it for now. Let's get to the podcast with Evan Rapoport. You and I met, it was maybe almost a month ago now, down in California at the Google Food Lab. And when you told me you're working on cool stuff around AI and food, I got excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was a really exciting conversation we had back then.
Yeah, it was funny. It's a little bit intimidating because I'm about to go on stage and to give a talk to food and ag people about AI. And here's this AI researcher for Google who's telling me he's come to listen to my talk. So it was a little bit intimidating.
You did a great job. So, no, it got me thinking. I appreciated it.
Let's tell people a little bit about yourself. So you work for Google. You've worked for X, the Moonshot Factory. You've had a few other jobs kind of in between over the past decade or so, all kind of centering around using technology in new ways to help food systems, agriculture, aquaculture, and a lot of different ways. So let's dive into that. But before we do that, tell us kind of what your current role with Google is.
Yeah, so currently I lead a program called Moonshots within Google Brain, which you may have heard recently is merging with DeepMind. And we're part of the Google Research Division. And my job is to help basically invest in a portfolio of high risk, high reward, kind of early stage AI research projects. And then I work with this portfolio, much like a VC might work with their investees. These are all internal projects, to be clear, and help them kind of go from 0 to 1.
To help people understand the way Google works, it seems like they must have like many, I don't want to quite call them skunkworks projects, but you have like lots of different little centers of incubation happening. And oftentimes you nurture these and you water and feed them, and then they grow up to maybe become something bigger.
Yeah, so, Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, has a lot of different areas that it's interested in. And there's some parts of the company that are very single bottom line focused. And then there's obviously some parts that are more philanthropic or more out there. And our research division kind of is a wonderful place where we get to look at a little bit of both. We have some things that we do that are to try to develop new tools for Google to make more money. And then we have some things that are to help the world explicitly. And so you need kind of different incubation sectors or labs because there's just different objectives at the end. And so when I was at X, X is explicitly tasked to create new businesses for Alphabet, new companies that would sit alongside Google, much like Waymo, the self-driving car company, whereas research doesn't have that same objective.
Or Mineral, which was a spin out, I think,
right.
of X, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Mineral or Tidal, which is the project that I actually started while I was at X, which is focused on aquaculture. And, again, the goal of all of these are to be, big businesses for Alphabet, but then also do good for the world.
Just to kind of make the distinction, you were working for X, which is essentially kind of been called historically Google's Moonshot Factory, but now you're within Google Brain doing moonshot work, basically kind of incubating new projects within essentially the AI division?
Yeah, they are separate. The moonshot word gets used in a few different ways. But yeah, if you take sort of a step out of Google and more broadly to the way we use moonshots as a phrase in society, it's really about taking on a big, ambitious, risky project that you don't actually think will likely succeed, but that if it does succeed, it will fundamentally change things. And so at the Google scale, these are sort of things that could affect the world, could affect 1 billion people. But I also teach classes with little kids, and I go into schools and we talk about a moonshot that could benefit their entire school. And so, you could scale it to sort of whatever domain you happen to be in. Just in this case, X has moonshots that are really, again, very focused on creating new businesses for Alphabet. And our moonshots in Brain, in the research division, really are about creating AI breakthroughs. So for instance, if you watch the keynote at I/O, which is Google's big annual conference, a couple weeks ago, 4 of the projects that were mentioned in that keynote came through our moonshots program in Brain. And if you had asked me a year or two ago about those, we would either not have even heard of them yet, or we would have thought, those are crazy, risky, they'll never work out. And, there they were on the stage creating massive breakthroughs for the world.
I mean, and that's kind of an indication of like how amplified the focus, broadly speaking, in the industry and certainly within Google has been on AI. We saw last fall the release of, ChatGPT, which was kind of a seminal event, I think, in the kind of the consumer awareness of this technology. And then you guys have accelerated the release of Bard, and you guys have been kind of pushing that. And so that really showed through at I/O.
The joke about AI that people often use is that it's whatever thing isn't really out yet or is just about to be released, but they forget that actually AI has been part of our lives for a long time. It's the thing that allows you to look on your phone and search for photos of your loved one, and then all those faces pop up, or, show me trees on my photos, those kinds of things, or the recommendation system that, tells you what restaurant you might want to go to or how to get to a restaurant, with a faster route. All of these things are AI, but we just start to take them for granted. So I think the trend that's been really getting a lot of people's attention over the last several months is generative AI, which is this idea of things that could go from one domain to another. So text to images, text to speech, text to talking to a chatbot. Those are sort of a different use of AI that people had previously kind of assumed were exclusive to humans, that creativity or reasoning, whatever it appears to be reasoning, was exclusive to people. But I think the technology lately is showing that that's not the case, and that's what's causing all of the excitement.
Yeah, I mean, I think like obviously generative AI has created a buzz, but I also think it was as much a product development leap evolution in terms of like creating new user interfaces, like a chat interface, both for ChatGPT and Bard, as it was like a leap forward in the capabilities around generative AI, because that has been progressing forward. It just wasn't really in kind of the broader purview.
Yeah, I think historically things that are available in research and in tech don't really get acknowledged as the breakthroughs that they were until they get out into products and hit the world. And I think this is pretty consistent here. People have had generative AI and chatbots for a couple of years already, and our researchers obviously saw this kind of stuff coming, but it wasn't until it got out there in a form that people can play with when it really hit. And I got to play with this all sooner than everybody else, obviously, because it was in my portfolio. And when I saw it, it was as mind-blowing as it is for everyone else when it hits the world.
So let's go back a little bit and kind of what you've been working on over the past decade. Like, as you indicated, you were working at Google X before you stepped out and did a startup called OceanKind, which we could get to. And at Tidal, the way it's been described publicly is, this idea of using technology in aquaculture, whether that's through the use of underwater cameras and machine perception to help better understand those systems. Can you talk a little bit about that technology and kind of what you did there?
Yeah, I think the story of how sort of Tidal came about is pretty interesting for food innovators out there. I would say my interest is in food, but I'll take a step even more broadly, which is around sustainability. I'm a nature lover. I'm an ocean lover. And so I've always been just personally passionate about how does technology help us protect the environment and protect the world. Before I worked at X, I worked at Google Street View, and I worked on the underwater Street View, which actually mapped out a lot of coral reefs and put Street View cameras into the national park system so you could see what hiking trails look like. So I've always been kind of looking for that connection And when I went to X, this was in around 2014. Most of the things at X were, basically big machines. That was the kind of the thing at the time. Self-driving cars, the Loon balloons, the Makani wind turbine, a number of other projects. And, a few of us were starting to learn about sustainability, and I got pretty fascinated with this idea that if we could feed the world more responsibly, we could actually help to protect and save nature. And sitting at a company that was trying to make money, this was a nice way to look at protecting the world rather than just through nonprofit use cases. And so I got fascinated with food, having never really thought about it other than as a consumer, and read, a dozen books and talked to as many world experts as would talk to me. And we looked into a bunch of different things, and really just serendipitously, I was off in Hawaii where I used to live, and I was mentoring a startup incubator. And I just ended up talking to someone there who had been doing some work in aquaculture. And the term aquaculture, fish farms, it wasn't in my purview. I knew what it was, but it just never thought about it. It never mattered to me. But because I'd been doing all this other work on looking at food systems, it hit me like, oh, wow, this could be a thing. So I read a bunch of books about seafood and sustainability and realized the efficiency of fish from a sort of protein creation perspective compared to cattle or pigs or even chickens. Fish are very, very efficient at turning meat or turning feed into meat. If you just want to look at them in a simple way, or the FCR, food conversion ratio, because they're cold-blooded, they live in water, so they don't have to support their body weight. And so when you kind of bring it down to first principles on why a fish is better than a cow from a sustainability perspective, it was very, very clear to me that aquaculture could be a big thing. And it was growing very quickly, and we started looking at a lot of big, crazy ideas, very large-scale projects, and ultimately got down to the insight that the key for us was going to be leveraging Google's AI capabilities to recognize some of the issues that were driving operations at aquaculture farms. We learned this through partnering with a big salmon company. And the sort of aha moment for me was going over to Norway and being out on a boat, watching how they operated these massive salmon farms. So picture a football field that's how big it is out on the ocean, but then it also goes down a couple hundred feet, right? And I saw these guys staring at TV screens, 10, 15 TV screens in front of them, all sort of showing the fish. And I was told these guys were called fish whisperers, that, before I had gotten there, these were these amazing, brilliant guys that sort of like were half fish, half man, and like could know when the fish were not eating. And I was like, well, I think we could do better with AI and we could improve all of these systems. And we went on to build that.
It's not quite the perfect analogy, but like, I'm a baseball guy. So like, I always think of like, reading Michael Lewis's book about Moneyball, on how like in the 1990s and even the early 2000s at the time, like all the scouts were like the pitcher whisperers or the hitter whisperers. They would look at the physique of a pitcher and they go, oh, this guy's going to be a pro. And this is before we were able to apply like big data analytics and kind of really understand it. And I imagine like this is even taking it further, using like computer vision systems, using data analytics. In the baseball world, they were resistant to that initially, these kind of innovations to kind of change the old guard. Did you find some level of resistance as you started to talk to folks, the people who had jobs as fish whisperers, to use this new technology? Or did they say, hey, wow, this is going to make my job way easier?
It was the latter. I expected it to be the former. And by the way, I love your analogy. It really turned out that these fish whisperers had other jobs on the boat, to maintain the boat, to fix all of the nets. Like, they were super busy. They really didn't want to have to spend their time staring at computer screens and clicking buttons to stop the fish feed from going down. So they were thrilled. They also had a bunch of other needs for the AI system that the fish whisperers couldn't do, such as telling them the weight distribution of all of the fish throughout this massive container, or the massive nets. So it's extremely important in aquaculture to know what you have in your stock, just like any land-based farmer would know. Like, how many animals do I have? Roughly, what do they all weigh? Because that's how you know how much you're going to make when you sell them. And they didn't know this because it's very hard to figure that out. And we were able to show with this stereo camera rig and AI very, very quickly, in the matter of a few months, that we could do sub 1% on weighing a fish as it swam by, just from looking at pictures of it. And I spent a bunch of time in Norway physically weighing fish myself to train these
Yeah.
to train these machine learning models. So yeah, they accepted it a lot faster. But I think generally people are resistant to technologies in the ways that you're saying around Moneyball. And the example I always think of is like my taxi driver who thinks he can outsmart Google Maps and goes the way that Google Maps isn't telling them, and that gets very frustrating to me because they're not going to win.
What I'm hearing is you're using technology to do almost instant inventory of what's in, like you called it a sock. I imagine the container or the nets or whatever where all the fish are swimming in a given space. So as a fish swims by, you can instantly tell how much it weighs. Can you maybe tell how old it is? Can you tell if it's ready for farming?
So we call it, I guess, a pen would be probably the best word. So yeah, you can add it, whatever terms. So you can, with the stereo rig, again, because it's stereo, you can tell how big the fish is and how much it weighs. You can tell certain behaviors that are key to their operations. So they want to know if this fish is eating or not, because if the food is coming down and the fish are not eating it, then you're wasting food. And that's a really bad thing because feed is very expensive in the operation. And so we have those things. We have, you can tell if it's sick with a few different diseases, but anyone who knows something about machine learning, it's important to train it on the thing you need to get an answer to. So maybe we could figure out how old the fish is, but it's not a question that I was ever asked. So we don't really worry about that. And I think, frankly, since these were all fish in aquaculture cages, they're all about the same age anyway. So what was really important was to know the distribution of weight so that when you go to sell those fish, which are sold before they actually, are harvested, they know what they have.
Sounds like it's pretty revolutionary at the time. This was like circa mid 2010, 2014, 2015. You were doing this early research. And what's happened since? I mean, if we look at aquaculture, because aquaculture has exploded. Fish farms have exploded. There's lots of kind of there's on land ones. There's ones kind of in shallow deep sea. Is this technology being used widely, or is this still fairly much in the kind of the early stages?
AI for aquaculture is absolutely expanding. I think it's become easier and easier to build machine learning models to solve a particular problem. So, Tidal is moving along really well. You can look on the X website and you can learn about the kind of latest on that. I don't work on the project anymore, so I'm not going to sort of comment on the latest breakthroughs there. But yeah, it's everyone's recognizing that this is a big thing because it's essentially a computer vision problem. And in a lot of these use cases, sometimes it's other modalities, but often computer vision. And it's kind of a no-brainer from a management perspective. So yeah, absolutely, you're going to see dramatic improvements in operations. And where I got really excited about that is if you're wasting food or if you're running an inefficient aquaculture farm, then you're just having a greater footprint on the world than if you ran a very efficient one. And since at the current moment, a lot of the feed that goes to aquaculture farms is actually from the ocean, it's really important to optimize that. There's a lot of work to try to shift away from ocean-sourced foods and to go to what's called fish-free feed. That will be dramatic in terms of its impact on the world. But in the meantime, as we're doing this, it's super important to improve that.
And you don't have to comment on kind of the trajectory, but when I look at like Google X, one of the most recent spinouts was Mineral, which is using similar computer vision AI in agriculture scenarios, and that was actually launched as a company within. It graduated to sound, I guess is the term, to become a company within Alphabet. They have a robot, I think it's called Don Roberto or something like that. And they've mapped a whole ton of the world's farmland and kind of plant breeds and species. If things go right, I would imagine that would be the goal for Tidal as well.
Oh, there's a number of different goals, and I'm not going to sort of project too far forward in the future, as
Sure.
you said. But yeah, look, the mission of Tidal is to feed the world responsibly and help protect the ocean. So you can imagine a number of ways in which an intelligent system underwater could help with that. And some of those use cases will be very lucrative, and then some of them will not be. But much like any company, you have some projects that keep the bills, and in order to scale, you need to have things that make a lot of money. And then there's some projects you do because you could really help the world, and it's not going to make money, but it's the right thing to do.
You spent some time in between X and then coming back to Google at Google Brain. You worked with a company called Oceankind. And I thought that was really interesting because you said in your description of it, you interviewed 100 experts or so across conservation. And after a while, you became an expert on cell-based seafood, as you describe it. So I've kind of often wondered how we can use technology to accelerate that use case. Talk a little bit about that work. And is AI going to be used in the world of cultivated seafood?
Sure. So for those not familiar, cultivated seafood is essentially a subset of the cultivated meat or lab-grown meat or cell-based meat or whatever term you want to use. And it's this idea that we could take the cells from an animal and use some growth media to build that up into the muscle tissue that we would be able to consume. You see a lot of this focused on chicken right now, and people who have tasted those products say it is identical, if not the best chicken that they've ever had. And it doesn't have all the health risks of often industrial farm chicken. So what our thought was when I started Oceankind was, I guess this was late 2017, early 2018, was to basically say, hey, we need to accelerate the work on the seafood version of these products, which were just starting to get attention from venture capitalists at the time. And the organization Oceankind is philanthropic. It's funded by a family office. And our hope was to really just be the catalyst that could get the seafood sector going eventually, so that the venture capitalists and all the single bottom line investors could come in. And that's how you mark success as a catalytic philanthropist. And so we did that. We made a number of different investments into different cell-based seafood companies. We also made a number of grants to both universities and nonprofits who did some really excellent work in understanding the space, in helping to understand the theory of change around protecting the ocean through these products. So it wasn't just another type of food, but it's actually having the impact that we wanted. Under what conditions will cell-based seafood actually leave more fish in the ocean, which was our goal.
Got it. AI in the broader food system isn't necessarily new. John Deere's been using computer vision on their tractors for a while now. And we've seen, guys like Dave Freeberg, I think even starting back at the Climate Corp, he eventually, he was a Google employee using AI in some ways. Talk about, where you think the evolution of using AI to help our food system become healthier, more sustainable is, and then maybe kind of what you're excited about going forward.
Yeah, so I break things down into kind of two big buckets when I think about this space. There are, if to use the innovator's dilemma terminology, there's sort of sustaining innovations, and then there are disruptive innovations. And I'm going to break off of that analogy a little bit, but basically there are things that will continue to provide incremental improvements that could actually be massive because of the scales that we're talking about. But in terms of thinking about the technology, it's incremental. So anything that's going to improve operational efficiency on a farm by improving yields by a couple percent, that is an incremental improvement. It's a huge breakthrough in terms of the impact, but it's still incremental. But then you could think about things that are actually really disruptive, like cultivated meat, which is sounds very sci-fi to a lot of people. And so I kind of think about things in those two different ways. I get excited about both. I tend to spend more of my time on the sort of moonshot disruptive, like what are the big things. And when we think about AI can often be the enabler for those. But AI alone isn't going to solve these problems, right? I think a lot of people who just assume AI will solve everything don't understand that it's a tool. It's a very powerful tool, but you have to have a really big business use case. So the things that get me really excited about the future of AI in food right now are areas where people feel like it's just so confusing. So let me just be specific. The health, nutrition, food interface or interaction is something that's so poorly understood right now. Why do I feel a certain way the next morning after I've eaten this type of food? These chronic conditions that I may have, that because of a diet. This is not that understood right now. And maybe you go to 10 different experts and they tell you different things. You could go to an acupuncturist, they'll tell you one thing, a Western medicine doctor will tell you another. To me, this sort of personalized nutrition, to use the buzz phrase, that's going to be something that AI plus sensors and the ability to understand the inputs into your system, being food, that I think is going to be the biggest breakthrough, because once you really understand why certain foods are causing diseases in certain people, and no two people are alike, then you can have people eat much, much better. And then I think that will have massive consequences on how we produce food in the world.
When I gave my talk, one of the things that I was asked to talk about was generative AI, and I'm by no means an expert on that. But when I kind of looked across the scope of AI in the food system, much of it is centered around things like machine learning, narrow AI, not a lot of application of generative AI beyond things like, marketing, maybe some consumer interfaces like putting someone at an automated bot at a drive-through. What do you think? How do you think generative AI could be used in the food system? Is it going to be largely consumer facing, things like recipe generation, or do you think it could have a bigger impact?
Recipe generation based on personal preferences absolutely could be, a huge thing. If I say my constraints are X, Y, and Z, create a dish for me with recipes. Absolutely, I could see that being a big thing. Much like you had your own personal chef and they knew your taste. So I think that'll be huge. Oftentimes I think about AI as something where if you could just hire a brilliant human who was top in the world at that thing and they could just be with you all the time, AI is sort of able to make that possible for you at a very affordable cost. So if I want to write, a poem in the style of Shakespeare about Google Maps, that would have probably been a fairly expensive endeavor. I'd have to go find a poet and all these kinds of things and pay them. Now it's, 10 seconds in Bard and it'll do that for me. And so I guess in the food space, I would say yes, recipes, but also, marketing and advertising to people, and not just the selling aspect of it, but the informational aspect of it. So to the extent that we, buy things online rather than, physical grocery stores, if you buy something online, you could imagine that the description that is presented to you, the photo of someone, consuming the product, whatever other advertising can be hyper localized to be focused on you. And I think that will have a really big impact.
Yeah, when I talk to folks who are doing things in, for example, novel food creation, looking for kind of interesting new combinations of plant-based food building blocks or something like that, they have told me they're definitely shying away from using technology like generative AI in particular, because they don't want to, for example, introduce a new protein that into the world that shouldn't be in the world, that was hallucinated by an AI.
Yeah, generative AI does have this ability to hallucinate, to sort of make up facts, but increasingly we are seeing that you can train it on data that is specific to a domain, and it can do a really good job on that domain. So for example, at our Google I/O, we announced MedPalm 2, which is built off of our large language models and has the highest scores on the medical licensing exams, and it could perform at the same level as a medical expert. Clearly, that is a comparable space to sort of food creation in terms of the importance of getting things right. So I'm not saying this is something I would deploy in food labs all over the country right now, but I could see it happening in the very near future. And we're not talking decades here, and we may not even be talking multiple years. Like this is happening faster. I'll just sort of summarize, not just broadly for food, but for anyone thinking about AI right now. This field is moving faster than even the people in it sort of expected it to move. And so the opportunities are really tremendous. And what I hope is that people who are experts in domains for sustainability, for health and nutrition, for everything that touches food, that they're actually having these kinds of conversations that you're hosting, and they're just starting to think about it, because it is ready and it is here. And we want the world to be shaped by people who are experts in these things and not just by technologists.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When I read the book Superintelligence. I don't know if you had a chance to read that, but it's a pretty seminal work. But one of the things the author talks about is like things will just accelerate exponentially over time, possibly when there's breakthroughs, because it's something that where the technology starts to learn on itself and just starts to grow faster. Have we hit kind of an inflection point with regards to this technology, or has it been fairly steady state, incremental improvement? It sounds like it hasn't been. It sounds like we maybe hit a knee in the curve.
We've definitely hit an inflection point for the utility of AI and the attention and the investment that it's going to. I wouldn't say that is guaranteed to bring superintelligence. As Bostrom's book talks about, I don't think that this is like right. We're on the paperclip path just because of this. And there's that's a whole topic for another podcast. I think if you want to go into
all right, we'll do that in the next one.
Yeah, we'll cover superintelligence and food in the next podcast. But I do think people should recognize that AI is able to start doing a lot of things that you previously would have needed to hire a lot of people to do. And although it may be true that some jobs will be replaced by AI, much like any technology could sometimes replace jobs, the better advice is that AI will actually replace, or people using AI might be your bigger competitor, not the AI itself. So how do you think about turning your small company with 5 people into something that's basically hitting as if it had 20 or 30 people? Now, you might not have ever been able to hire 20 or 30 people, so the AI isn't actually replacing that delta, but it's giving you the ability to act like a much bigger company. And I think that's what's really, really exciting about it.
All right, Evan, where can people find out more about your work?
I'm on LinkedIn, Evan Rapoport there, and I tend to post pretty regularly about things that are exciting to me. And so, yeah, please engage with me there.
All right. Thanks so much. This has been great.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
All right. That's it. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I learned a whole bunch, including how AI can help the world of aquaculture. I just thought that was super fascinating, how technology like that can really help folks who run fish farms. And you can just imagine what a big impact those types of technologies can make in that world. So really interesting conversation. If you want to find more Spoon Podcast, you know where to go. You can find us in the usual podcast places. Also find us on our website, The Spoon. We should be back in the next week or so with another podcast, so stay tuned for that, and we'll talk to y'all soon.